Hello, listeners! Today is Wednesday, June 15th. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Shop Plaza. This is the show where we talk about how retail collides with every part of our lives. I'm your host, Sara Lebow. On this episode, we'll be discussing what's working and what isn't working in the world of subscription e-commerce. Joining me today is senior analyst Blake Droesch. Hi, Blake.
Hey, Sarah. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. I'm also joined today by senior analyst Zach Stambor. Welcome, Zach.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So glad to have you on the pod. We're going to jump right into it and kick things off with our first segment, which is called News and Reviews, where I give the news and our guests tell me their reviews. Today's news comes from our friends over at Insider. It's a June 7th headline that is, Target is bracing for a profit hit as it takes steps to dump excess pandemic-era inventory, including more markdowns for customers. Zach, your review of this headline in 60 seconds is?
Well, after 2 years of a pandemic, there was a sudden shift in consumer spending at the start of this year, and consumers shifted more of their spending on services, going out to eat, traveling, entertainment, and less on goods, because for many reasons, but one of them being we bought a lot of goods over the past 2 years and we just don't need that much more. Mm-hmm. There was also the continued inflation, which is causing some people to pull back on spending. So Target's generally good at merchandising, but even they were caught blindsided. And that's not a great short-term sign, but I'm pretty confident that they'll figure it out.
Okay, so feeling confident in Target despite this potential profit hit. Blake, I'm looking at you. What is your review in 60 seconds of Target bracing for a profit hit as it dumps excess pandemic-era inventory?
Yeah, I think, this is certainly an industry-wide issue for all of the reasons that Zach just pointed out, and it's not going to be something that's just specific to Target. We saw Walmart recently had a Walmart Plus sales day. There are a lot of rumors going around again this year that Amazon is going to have a couple of Prime days, and a lot of the, poor retail earnings that we saw over the last couple of weeks came from the fact that there's bloated inventory among all retailers. So I think that short-term sales are going to be the way to offload a lot of this stuff. And long-term, I think the retailers that can really learn how to be agile during these tumultuous times in consumer behavior are going to benefit in the long term, because these types of shifts in, spending, they happen, and sometimes they're tricky to manage.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is a problem across the board. Consumers are changing how they're spending because they're changing how they're living, and also the world around them is changing. I wonder if these topics will come back up again in our next segment when we talk about subscription e-commerce. Just a little teaser as we jump into that segment, which is called Retail Me This, Retail Me That, where we discuss an interesting retail concept. Specifically, how brands can hold on to subscribers in a changing retail landscape. So, Blake, you just came out with a report this May, so this past month, on subscription e-commerce sales, where you mentioned that subscription e-commerce sales in the US will grow by 15% year over year in 2022. That's for a total of $33.5 billion in sales. That's a $4 billion increase over last year, that $33.5 billion figure. So my question for you, Blake, is what is subscription e-commerce, and why can't I figure out how to cancel any of mine?
Well, subscription e-commerce is basically any delivery of a reoccurring product that happens online. It's not to be confused with what we would consider a retail membership, which is like Amazon Prime. Subscription e-commerce is anything from, getting a reoccurring order of your coffee beans or your pet food, or, it's a service that is offered through a retailer like Amazon Subscribe and Save feature, or, one that comes from a brand like Dollar Shave Club, etc.
Gotcha. So I mentioned, per your report, subscription e-commerce sales are going to surpass $33 billion in the US this year. I looked back in our time machine, and by that I mean our forecasting data. In 2019, the US saw about half of that, so $16.5 billion in subscription e-commerce sales in 2019. Subscription revenues also make up an increasing share of the e-commerce market as a whole. Zach, what's made subscriptions take off so successfully during the pandemic?
Well, to start, it's super convenient. You don't want to go to a store during the pandemic. You wanted to stay home, and you knew how often you needed coffee. You knew how often your dog needed to be fed. And so you could just have it arrive at your doorstep on a regular cadence.
Gotcha. So convenience is what made it blow up in the pandemic. You mentioned dog food, you mentioned coffee, so did you, Blake. Are those like the key categories that blew up during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think, it's part of this larger trend that happened during the pandemic of people really buying a lot more of their food and other everyday essentials online. And when you look at sort of the pool of e-commerce subscription purchases, I think almost more than half of them worldwide come from either the food and beverage category or the beauty and personal care category. And we saw big growth in general in terms of e-commerce sales in those categories, which are really ripe for subscription. So I think that really helped those areas take off.
Gotcha. So food, beauty. You mentioned coffee. I think meal kits are another big one that I have not ventured into, but maybe one day will when I forget how to cook. Moving on from that, we talked about like how much subscription e-commerce took off during the pandemic. A lot of things that took off during the pandemic are seeing sort of two fates right now. So you can see continued success, something like TikTok that's continuing to increase in time spent, even surpassing YouTube. So the pandemic success continues to build on itself. Or you can see a cooling period. We talked about that with Target having a lot of excess inventory at the top of the episode. Amazon also posted a loss this past quarter for the first time since 2015. Which of these paths, continued success or a cooling period, is subscription e-commerce headed down?
I think it kind of falls into two buckets. There's the subscriptions that are focused on convenience, and then there are the subscriptions that are focused on novelty. And so the convenience ones still make sense. I still need to feed my dog. I still need coffee. But the novelty ones, I'll give you an example of that, is the Kiwi boxes. I have 2 kids, and over the pandemic, especially in lockdown, we needed stuff just to entertain them. And so we got Kiwi boxes.
Can you explain what that is? What's a Kiwi box? I don't have kids and I don't know kids.
Of course. So it's a shipment that arrives at your house once a month, and your kid can build something out of it. It might be a robot, it might be a toy, it might be a game. And there's only so many of those that you need, or actually that you want in your house after a set period of time.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a subscription, maybe not to junk, but certainly to having stuff. Subscription
junk
to stuff.
Adjacent.
And also not as great as having Kiwis arrive every month, which I would love. Although
I was going to say actual Kiwis are very expensive. So if there was some sort of subscribe and save deal on the Kiwi, I think that might be the next big subscription wave.
I would love to subscribe and save on the Kiwi. I love Kiwis and they are expensive. Although, Blake, you actually did mention Fruit of the Month before as something, before we were talking about this separately, as something that sort of also fell into that category. Like, I would love a box of kiwis. I love kiwis. I don't really need a box of pears every month. So I think that's another sort of non-necessity hit or miss one.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the oldest example of like a subscription product is sort of a, XYZ of the month. A lot of the times it was, a gift, and then it sort of evolved into like this sort of surprise and delight model where you're getting a bunch of, stuff every month that you might need, you might not need, and it's sort of a discretionary purchase. But with the sort of advancement of buying things that are really necessities, and that a lot of that growth now coming from online, I think that has really propped up the subscription e-commerce industry. And when you look at that 15% growth, it's like, okay, yeah, there is a pullback because people are going out to eat more. They're going back into the office. They don't need all of these things sent to their house on a very even cadence like they did during the pandemic. But we're seeing overall that food and beverage e-commerce is still growing. So I think that that's sort of what's helping to sustain the subscription e-commerce market, even as people sort of return to the lifestyle of pre-pandemic that was maybe a little bit less based around an in-home routine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, now that I'm going into the office at least once every so often, it's more likely I'm stopping past like a CVS or a Walgreens to pick up like that toothpaste versus I did have a subscription to like a makeup sample of the month. This is a visual medium, but we're recording. You guys are looking at my bedroom podcasting studio right now. I could pick up a box full of just like tubes of makeup. You guys can attest to that I will never use because it's sort of not useful the way that like a coffee or meal kits would be. So how then can subscription companies or retailers as a whole, how can they maintain subscribers? Is it just by giving them materials that they want, or is there some sort of marketing magic?
I think it is just it's quite simply about fulfilling a need, offering something that people will need and want on a regular basis, and less of the novelty piece, because the novelty piece wears off, and it can wear off rather quickly if people are getting nothing of value out of it. If you get one of those beauty boxes and it's all stuff that doesn't suit you, well, then you're going to be pretty quick to cancel it.
Gotcha.
I think that's exactly it. And it's honestly, it's rather simple, but it means that some categories are going to be really conducive to the subscription model and others aren't. So when you're thinking about, you know, the next subscription that pops up because it seems like everyone is doing it these days, like it's relatively easy to sort of gauge what is going to stick and what isn't. It's exactly what Zach said. I mean, is it providing convenience and is it providing like a value for a product that somebody's going to be buying anyways?
Sure. So we've talked about what works in subscription e-commerce, which is fulfilling a regular need, providing that value. We've talked about what doesn't work, which is filling my apartment with junk that I will not use. We're going to go to a break so I can try out this Moisture Boost Cooling Marine Concentrate Serum that I got in a box and have never used. After the break, I'm going to ask Zach and Blake which subscription services have staying power in some key categories. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Shop Plaza. Your sassiest friend, e-commerce pal, and business bud. Shop Plaza keeps it real, keeps it simple, and keeps it all on a single platform. So, no matter where you are, what you're selling, or what your business size, you can tech your business to the next level. Whether you are looking to grow your business, gain an amazing solution, or become a partner, go to shopplaza.com. That's SHOPLAZZA.com to learn more. Welcome back from the break. Now it's time for pop-up rankings, where we take a look at specific examples and we rank them. So Blake and Zach, earlier this week, I came to you and I asked which subscription services you think have staying power in the key categories of pets, beauty, food, and also clothing. So let's start off with a category that I am the least familiar with right now. Which pet brand subscription do you think has staying power and why?
Well, I am very familiar with this because I have a dog who needs to be fed, and I choose to feed him by going to Chewy, which offers auto ship, and a large share, 72.2% of its net sales stemmed from auto ship in the first quarter. And that's because Chewy makes it so easy to get your food on a regular basis. You get a big, steep discount the first time you sign up, and then a smaller discount on subsequent orders. So they do a really good job.
Gotcha. So they reel you in with the discount. They keep you around with the discounts continuing. And the main appeal is that your dog gets to eat. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, they're fulfilling that need. Your dog continues to need food. As many times as you feed it and you say, you already ate today, your dog continues to need that food. Another key category we talked about is beauty. Blake, what is a beauty subscription service that has staying power?
Yeah, so I think beauty is interesting because it sort of hits on both of the value propositions in the subscription space. You have beauty boxes that are sort of these like surprise and delight vehicles where you can discover different products. And then you also have those products like Amazon Subscribe and Save, which really keys on the value and convenience. So I think that's really a true winner right there, is a retailer like Amazon that offers a way for you to order your beauty and personal care products, the ones that you use, routinely on an even cadence, and have those delivered without having to, worry about going out to the store whenever you run out.
Yeah, beauty is an interesting category, right? Because we're sort of seeing slowdown in a lot of products people are buying. But for beauty, I mean, that picked back up, right? As people started leaving their homes again. I'm guessing, I have no data to back this up, that Amazon probably saw that pick back up as well. And I would wonder if those Discover boxes sort of lost that sheen. They lost that sheen for me as someone who continues to get these small tubes that really feel like that excess inventory is being offloaded directly onto me. Coming off of tubes, Zach, another category we talked about, a key category in this area is food. We've talked about coffee. We've talked about meal kits. What to you is a food subscription service that you feel has staying power?
Yeah, I'll go straight to coffee because coffee is just something that you consume every day. You know how much you consume it. And so Keurig does a really nice job of having a subscription model that offers value. You get 25% on every order when you subscribe. And convenience. It shows up at your door on the cadence that you know and want it to be.
That makes sense. I think that it's a great opportunity to have people subscribe to a substance that they need to consume every day. I know I need to consume it every day, so that makes sense for me, although it relies on you having an area where you can get packages all the time. I guess I shouldn't go into that too much. If you stole my package, can you give it back, please? Thank you.
It does help to have a category that's addictive.
Yeah, more so than, I guess food is also pretty addictive.
That's true.
As is pet food. Okay, I feel like we sort of gave answers that really made sense in those categories, right? Chewy, huge. Amazon, huge. Any coffee company is going to be pretty huge. The last key category we talked about was clothing. I don't actually know what a clothing company is that has staying power for subscription e-commerce. Blake, can you speak to this at all?
Yeah, so, clothing is really interesting in this space because the sort of discovery box in apparel was really one of the first big subscription e-commerce model to sort of arrive on the scene, 10 plus years ago, along with meal kits. So, you have your Stitch Fix, you have, your now defunct trunk clubs, which really sort of made a big splash with this model where you're going to fill out a questionnaire and then there's a mix of either just AI or a personal stylist that's going to send you a box of clothing, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, etc. But what we've seen is that, consumers don't really need to, have this service on a routine basis. And a lot of these companies that have built business models around the idea that consumers are going to keep coming back to buying apparel in the same way and on an even cadence. A lot of those companies have sort of had their moments and are now really struggling. There's sort of this now famous example that, sort of met its demise recently, that Trunk Club was acquired by Nordstrom, and it was, this really new innovative way for, men's clothing discovery to take place online. And sort of almost immediately after the company was acquired, it sort of, looked like it was going to be a big loss for the retailer. And as recently as, a couple of weeks ago, they said that they were shuttering it. So we haven't really seen a business model for subscription e-commerce really have staying power in apparel, which is interesting because it was one of sort of the first examples in the space.
Gotcha. So our ranking for clothing is no one yet. I actually want to ask you a follow-up about that. I know that Rent the Runway has recently, maybe less recently, sort of pivoted to that like subscription model. Are they doing something different than Trunk Club did? Are they going to find success there?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because now there are other companies within the apparel space that are playing to different aspects of the subscription model, but outside of sort of this business model that we've been talking about this episode, which is like, you're paying X amount of dollars every month for X amount of product to be sent to your home. You've got like the runway where you can go into a subscription model, if you want to buy in, but they're not reliant on that because they know that, weddings, formal events, these things don't happen routinely. So a lot of their customers are going to be coming as one-offs, and a subscription is basically a way to offer a different type of model that it's not dependent on, but can be valuable to a certain sect of their, customer base.
Okay, so it's not a box on my doorstep situation.
A rental model also makes more sense in apparel because you only have so much closet space.
Sure.
And so when people are returning to the office, they're returning to in-person events, they're dining out, and they want to refresh their wardrobe, but they don't want to commit financially to that, they can turn to Rent the Runway and do so in a way that makes sense for their budget.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like in clothing, we're not seeing like this box on my doorstep every month situation working because I don't buy clothes every month. So yeah, I mean, it's just simply not like coffee or a moisturizer or a pet food situation.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining me today. Thanks, Blake.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Great to have you on the pod for the first time. Blake's subscription e-commerce report is available for pro subscribers on emarketer.com. Thank you, listeners, and to Victoria, who edits the podcast and is going to help me figure out how to cancel my beauty subscription box. I'm going to go try out this illuminating turmeric facial scrub, and figure out what that means because it seems like it hurts. I will see you next week for another episode of Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Shop Plaza. And tune in tomorrow as Marcus brings you another episode of Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast.